Today, I'm having a conversation with Owen Marcus. Owen is a pioneering coach and author known for integrating emotional physiology and attachment theory into men's emotional connection. His 30-year journey has led him to author a book, be featured in a documentary, and start three impactful businesses targeting men. He has been featured in Men's Health, the New York Times, ABC News, and the Today Show. He helps men transform their relationships and leadership skills, offering listeners new insights into achieving personal and professional success through emotional wellness. And in this conversation, you're going to learn how Owen's early struggles shaped his unique approach to men's emotional health. You're going to discover the impact of creating spaces where men can be vulnerable and real. You're going to learn the true definition of vulnerability when it comes to men. You're going to understand why traditional ideas of masculinity often limit personal growth, explore tools and practices that help men reconnect with their true selves. And of course, you're going to find out how the MELD method is changing lives and redefining what it means to be a man. This episode of the DMD podcast with Owen Marcus starts right now. Owen, welcome to the Dad's Making a Difference podcast. Great to see you today.
Thank you, Ken. Pleasure to be here.
I'm excited for a conversation. I think this is a conversation that many guys in our community may shy away from, the idea of vulnerability and masculinity and what that means, but it's an important piece of the whole picture, I think, not only of manhood, but of fatherhood and what it takes to be a dad making a difference requires a certain level of vulnerability. So thank you for coming on, agreeing to be here, and taking time out of your day to spend with us.
My pleasure.
Owen, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about your background, your research, the work that you do?
Yeah, I got into all this sort of by accident many decades ago. I had a roommate that had given up his law practice to learn to be a rolfer, which is a particular kind of body work that essentially gets rid of chronic tension from stress or injuries. And he convinced me to give it a try. And next thing I knew, I was learning how to do it myself. But I spent 4 years in Boulder, Colorado, which was a haven for all the somatic or body-oriented therapies, from the physical therapies like rolfing to the growing psychotherapies that back then was fringe, now is the most popular kind of therapy out there. So I was just sort of in the right place at the right time, got trained by the guys that literally writing all the books on it now. And I realized that, you know, as humans, and particularly as men, we're really thwarted by the stress and tension we have. Yes, it's stored in our bodies, but as a culture, we're so used to it, we don't realize how that tension and those behaviors affect us and particularly limit us in our relationships. And with that, you know, what you said about the vulnerability, if we're tense and our belief in our culture, as we know also well, is to not share our vulnerability, that it really hinders our relationships, our more intimate ones, particularly with our partners and our kids. So when a guy really wants to improve their relationship, essentially two things have to happen. They have to sort of release, downregulate the stress response, which has become now chronic. And because of that, they're often not aware of, and learn some skills that they never had taught, which is these skills of, you know, how do you, in an authentic way, connect with someone?
There's so much there that I want to unpack really quickly. When you started talking about body pain and tightness and awareness and how that ties in with how we carry things, you mentioned that. I was thinking about how my body feels right now and the pains, the stress. Man, I think I need this. And I don't, it's not the therapy side of the role thing that I might need. I get all the stuff, but it's the piece of the awareness of like, what am I carrying on my shoulders? What am I carrying mentally right now that's showing and exemplifying itself in the physical form? And can we start there for a moment? Like, for guys who are listening to this and be like, oh, here we go, another vulnerability thing, because we've talked about this before, but it's so important for guys to be open and get stuff off their chest, get stuff off their shoulders. I think we carry so much.
We do. And I learned, you know, decades ago working with men, and you know, some of these were elite athletes. We all, and I was one of the worst. We don't want to talk about our emotions. So if someone asked me, what do you feel, Owen? I'd be looking for the closest door out of the room.
Yeah.
But like virtually all guys, if you said, you ask you, what do you feel in your body? I might go, I don't know what I feel. Now you're more aware than most. Back then I wasn't. But we don't resist that. And if you ask guys about stress, then it becomes a competition about, oh, I got more stress than you. So
It's like a
what I
badge of
realized
honor.
from working with all these men over the years, but also the science, is that stress that we pick up in our body, most of it is in the arena of what we call emotional,
Hmm.
rather than the physical stress. And so, as you said, we just get tighter and tighter. Maybe we get chronic back pain, or we're stiff or uptight. And so, when we can understand that from a physiological perspective, men understand that the whole vulnerability thing is not what we've been trained to think it is.
Mhm.
Because we've been trained to think being vulnerable is like being a woman.
Yeah.
I love
Sappy.
women,
Yeah.
but it's being vulnerable as men is just really being real, and often it's just being real to what you're feeling physically.
Yeah. Why do guys struggle to be real? Like I've this is something we talk about in our community, and I'm part of other men's communities, which I think is an important piece of why I can get up every day, go through my day, be reflective, be aware of how I feel. And it's not because I'm good at this. Suck at this stuff. I have to surround myself with other people who can bring that out of me. Why or how do guys begin to open up to the point where they can start to feel that release of that emotional stress, not the physical stress, but the emotional, the mental stress?
Well, I think you named one of the ways, which generally in the society out there we don't have anymore, which is a more intimate, real tribe or group of guys where we can be real with. And for the most part, guys are a lot better at being real with other guys, given it's a safe space, than we are in most other spaces or co-ed spaces. So that's one component. But the other component is using the physiology of our body. And
Hmm.
this is where the science really comes in. So there's one scientist in particular, his name is Stephen Porges. We've had him on our program, brilliant guy, and he created what's called the polyvagal theory. Sounds real complicated, but essentially what it is that he realized in his research that we are hardwired for connection. And he's not the first to say it, but he understood the physiology. And when we can, he called co-regulate. When I see you, I look at you, and I can read you unconsciously as you can read me. And your facial muscles are telling me that you're safe. Your tone and your voice tells me you're safe. Your body movement tells me you're safe. And so that allows me to downregulate because you're not a threat anymore. I start to be able to focus more internally, feel myself somatically or my body, feel my emotions. That's it's being vulnerable. And then I can be authentic. I can have a real conversation with you and we start to connect like you do and I do in our communities because we go to those communities and we don't have to wear a mask.
Right.
So that's really what being vulnerable is. It's not, going someplace and suddenly sitting on a couch and crying. No,
Yeah.
it's just being real.
That's right. Let's talk about that for a moment. The misconceptions guys have about vulnerability when they hear it. You just said it's like going someplace and sitting on a couch and crying. Well, that's not what it is. What are some of the other misconceptions that you've heard in your community and the guys you've worked with around this idea of vulnerability?
Well, the first one is that, to be vulnerable is to be weak and
Mm.
all that. To admit to having needs is being weak. But one of my friends is, he was first he was in the army, and then he was a New York City cop, and then he was a New York City fireman. He was a lieutenant in the fire department. He was pulling people out of the trade center.
Mm.
And at the time, he was learning to be a therapist. And he went on to being like one of the top couples therapists. And George follows his name. And he has a good spin or definition on this. And he talks about, the courage it takes to go into a fire,
Mhm.
which is, intuitively, we don't want to do that.
No, no.
But because of his training, because he has all the equipment, and because he has his team behind him, even with the fear, he does that. And that's often how we have to start coming in from our societal background into these sort of groups and settings is realize that, okay, it takes some courage to just show up and be vulnerable. And being vulnerable is really just being truthful.
Mhm.
So if you ask me, what do I feel? Yeah, I might tell you what I feel somatically, but I tell you what I feel emotionally. Like, oh, I'm angry or I'm sad. And I know in our groups, that's the first thing we do. We do this quick check-in, and guys just say where they're at. And in the beginning, that's a push for most guys because there's no place out there where we can do that.
Right. So, what challenges do men face right now, maybe in the community, maybe at work, maybe in the family, that you believe are not allowing them to address how they feel, their feelings, how they feel, where they're at, or even act as a barrier for them saying, yeah, I'm frustrated right now. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm happy. I'm elated. What's standing in the way of men right now in our society?
It's the two things. It's the stress and trauma they have in their history or their body, the tension. So they're going up against literally tension. And then the whole belief system that we've been imbued with this culture, like, men don't cry and all that. That's an extreme, but the sense of that, to say what you really feel
Mm-hmm.
and what you really want is a weakness. So, for most men, they don't have a safe place to do that. And Porges says, and I would 100% agree, that the bottom line is we need safety. And when I work with couples, we do couples retreats and all this for couples. And what we realize is that for a lot of these guys, it's not that they don't love their partners. They do. They want to succeed, but they don't know how to. And so once they get a little training in it, they take off. So a lot of it is the training we have is at best limited. So what you probably see this working with guys. I mean, part of what we all need is a model, but we
Yeah.
need some basic training on, how do I show up in a way that's authentic for me? I'm not, it's not prescriptive. I'm not just doing what someone else told me to do, but it's real for me. And being real, I'm starting to connect to other people.
Yeah. I love what you said about opening up. I think there's some hard pieces that guys face when it comes to that. I know personally in my own journey, a transformation took place when I had no choice but to open up. Like I waited and held it in so long that it impacted my physical and mental health so much that I had no choice. Like it just blew up. And I see in our community, and I'm sure you see with the guys that you've worked with, there's men who are just like, it's like that balloon that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it pops instead of letting a little air out every once in a while. Uh, when I see this and I feel this, I just want to encourage guys to let a little air out. Like just say it. And it
I
feels,
agree, but we don't know how to do that.
it's just so weird, right? Like
I know.
we've never been trained by it. So that's
I,
my next question is, guys are motivated by transformations. I run a fitness and nutrition coaching business. I have Dads Making Difference. Transformations in both, very different, but guys love to see transformations. You said we don't know how to do this. So, in the men you've worked with, what are some of the transformations that you've witnessed, and what are some of the tools that were used so they learned how to do that?
I mean, the transformations go across the whole spectrum. I mean, some of the more extreme ones, we've had men, in documentaries that have been done on us saying, if it wasn't for this work, I would have killed myself.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's the extreme, but it's
Right.
everything down from there. Yeah, understanding it's a little, that helps because our mind sort of, if we have a new model, that at least gets us in the room maybe.
Mhm.
But part of it is that we need to see it. So a lot of this learning that we didn't get is because we didn't see it.
Mm.
And it's not our fault, and it's not our father's or uncle's fault. I mean, we have generations, I would say, really since the Industrial Revolution began, that we haven't had men at home or men really guiding or raising the boys.
Mm.
And so it's no fault of women. They had to show up. But since the Industrial Revolution, men had gone to work for 40, 60 hours a week. The teachers were women. So we've gotten that model really well, but we haven't gotten the more masculine model of what is it like for a man to be vulnerable and connect. But, in your community and our communities and groups and trainings, they see that. So there's a little joke. Sometimes we'll do a training like 60 guys. It'll be like in a big circle, and I say, look, we're going to change the rules here. You get you get honored for taking a risk. how vulnerable you can be. So a
Yeah.
few guys still check in, and one guy just takes a deep breath and says something that he normally wouldn't say. And then what he sees is he's not shamed, he's actually honored.
Yeah.
And then by the end, because guys are competitive, they start going, well, if you did it, I could do it better.
Yeah.
And then they get more and more vulnerable, and guys are crying, they're opening up, they're saying, I haven't ever told anyone this, or I haven't said this to anyone for decades.
Yeah.
And we just need to know one that's safe and how to do it. And we get a lot of that by being with other men in a safe community.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because you'll leave those communities in those moments and they'll feel like this weight's off. And then they'll go home, they'll be in such like just different. You can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it. And their wife will be, oh, what would you do? Oh, nothing. It was just a bunch of guys talking.
Yeah,
You
you're
know,
right.
like downplay it, right? And
Oh
so,
yeah, I mean, I started this Sandpoint Men's Group for just myself 20 years ago, and asked 11 guys, and now there's over 500 guys that have been in the group or in the group now. It's now like 6 groups in the small town in North Idaho, not too far from you. Um, and so when I was living there a few years ago, I'd be walking around this small town, and women would come up to me, and I don't know, and they know me. Go, oh, I want to thank you for my husband. I don't know what you do because he doesn't tell me, but he's like a different man. And
yeah,
then and it's like we'd have these events, and these women would come up, and I learned more in this one event. My husband never tells me what happens, and it's not that they're supposed to reveal the secrets, but they don't say anything about it. But she sees or they see these change because what happens over time, and I'm sure you see this, is not only do we change the mental model
yeah,
and even the emotional or relational model, but we actually change our physiology.
yes,
And the women, our partners, pick it up. And the
yeah,
joke in our group was the best night for sex was the night of the group because these guys would come home and they would be really present, powerful, and open.
yeah,
And the women would tell me, that's the guy I married.
right. Yeah, powerful stuff. It's true. You start to see the difference. You start to feel the difference. And it's just this how you carry yourself through space. I know that the first time I stepped into we call them a mastermind group, where I sat and there was like 10 other guys and we're on this call and it was virtual. And I got into a little bit of my backstory and guys were asking questions and they were probing.
Hmm.
And I had a choice to make. I could just like
Hmm.
brush it off, or I could tell them the truth.
Yeah.
I told them the truth. And then I get emotional and then I get off the call and then I feel good. And I walk out of my home office and my wife's like, how's the call? I'm like, oh, it was good.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, it's
Just
good.
another call.
It was good. What you
I
guys
know
talk?
we do it.
What'd
I
you
do
talk
it.
about? Oh, it's stuff, you know. Yeah. No. But it's important for guys to have what I call unfiltered conversations in a group of men that they can trust. That's been a huge part of my development. I see it in, you've seen that in the development of the guys who you're surrounded by. It's that you need to have unfiltered conversations and with guys you can trust, guys that you honor, guys that you can speak into as much as they can speak into you.
Yeah, and you feel safe with them, which is what you're really saying, and they have your back, and they'll hold you accountable, not in a ruthless way, but if I tell you that I'm going to talk to my boss next week, asking for a raise, yeah, the first question you're going to have is, how did the conversation go?
Yeah. How'd you feel about that conversation?
Right,
That's it.
exactly.
That's what that's it. So you had the conversation. How did you feel about it? How did it make you feel going in? Feeling coming out? Guys don't want to talk about that. They just want to either be like, yeah, it worked, or no, it didn't work.
or,
Yeah.
or they go off in some interesting story, which is like a distraction. But yeah, we just don't want to stay present with what it felt like when we did it and what it feels like to share it.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said a few moments ago because I don't want it to go unnoticed. You talked to the importance of having men in the home being active in raising kids. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've had guys out, we've been working, we've been out of the home. The mother's been the caregiver, the nurturer, raising the kids, or public school raises the kids. But dads need to be more actively engaged in fatherhood, in raising kids. Can you speak to that and the differences that you've seen in the men that you've worked with the men who have been present in the home versus men who haven't been?
Yeah, I can think of a few men that were like in my group over time, and they can I mean, one guy in particular I'm thinking of, um, he was having problems with his kids,
Mm.
two boys. I mean, he was having problems, his wife was having problems. They were starting to get problems at school, and I'll call him Joe. And and I worked with Joe, and it took a little while. I mean, several months, but he started getting real with us, and not just presenting the problem, but really what was behind it and how he was brought up, and his parents divorced, and he was like he had no support and no accountability, and how all that was sort of trickling down into how he wasn't present with his kids.
Mm.
And once he
Yeah.
became present to himself and he learned how to do that and he got to practice in the group every week, it started to shift. And within a year, these boys that were a real pain in the ass, I remember one night him saying that one of them unsolicitedly came up and hugged him and said he loved him.
Wow. Huge
And it was all
transformation.
because Joe was showing up differently. But it took Joe a while to, not learn it in his head, but learn it and practice it and be held accountable because he was pretty slippery
Yeah.
because that's how he learned to survive as a kid.
Yeah.
And that meant he wasn't really connecting with his kids. I mean, physically they had everything they needed, but they didn't have the emotional connection that they desperately needed. And because they needed it, they were acting it out.
Yeah. I love this conversation so much because in our community, we talk about like the well-rounded father. We have this fatherhood 360 framework. It's like 6 pillars, and you want to be involved and engaged in growing in each one of these. Some faster than others, some you'll have more focus on than others. And I truly believe that if you're physically well, you're taking care of your body physically, you're active, you're eating well, that impacts your mental health, and then that impacts how you show up for people, and then how you lead and you build capacity in others and you build relationships. And I love this conversation because at the root of all of this, you without vulnerability, none of that can happen. Because without vulnerability, you're just be closed in. You're not going to feel great going. I know what I'm not being vulnerable, not being open, and I'm holding things in how I feel in my brain. I'm not working out feeling how I want to feel. I don't have the energy I want. I'm not sleeping well. I'm not showing up for my kids. My conversations are short. I'm asking poor questions of them.
Mhm.
I just love this so much because I think it's important for the guys listening to this right now. If you are listening to this right now, listen to the importance of how this impacts everything that you do.
Yeah, I
Everything.
mean, I used to have an integrated medical clinic in Scottsdale, so I'm a huge advocate of health because that is sort of the foundation. Because as you, at least in FERC camp, if I don't have the physical health or the vitality, I'm not going to be able to be present after a long day. So that's important. But you can have all that, and if you're not vulnerable, or maybe not even vulnerable is the word, but connected to your kids, they're going to feel it.
Right.
And here's one of the things I've found to really be connected to someone else, you're first going to be connected to yourself.
Mm,
And it's not that you have to know yourself in a cognitive sense, but you got to know yourself in an emotional, maybe unconscious, somatic, but certainly an emotional sense. And the more connected you are to your own experience or experiences, the more you're going to be able to connect to someone else, and they're going to be able to pick that up.
I love that. So if that's the starting point, which I totally agree, and what a hard thing to do is to be connected to yourself.
Oh yeah, for
what
us
it
guys.
Yeah, if that's the starting point, what are some tips that you could offer the guys listening to this right now, that if that's the ground level, if that's the base camp where you want to get connected with yourself, what can they do? What can they start doing right now to start that process?
So I came up with this formula, which really was just observing what was happening and working. And I call it the ROC, ROC.
Mm,
So everyone's told us to relax. That's the R. But they don't tell us how to do that.
mm,
And what science and my experience over the decades has shown me is we relax by slowing down our physiology. And that might be the most critical thing is slow down your physiology. And then you know how to do this, and I'm sure you teach it. I mean, one of the obvious and simple ways is our breath because it goes between the autonomic or unconscious nervous system and what we can control. So as we become aware of our breath and as we slow it down, particularly as we slow down the exhale, we start to slow down our physiology. So there's a lot of ways to slow down the physiology. So you slow down the physiology and you're telling yourself you feel safe.
Mm.
because a lot of this, and this is a stress response, and stress response is a survival response, and survival response, in essence, is saying, I don't feel safe, or I might not be safe. So as you slow down your physiology and you become more aware of even your body, you're saying to yourself, oh, if I can be aware of myself, I guess I'm safe. And then it sort of self-perpetuates. And then you go into the O, you open up to vulnerability, you open up to what's present, you open up to your own vulnerability. And then, you open up to being aware, compassionate, maybe empathetic towards the other person's vulnerability. But it has to start with you because you got to feel it. And this is, as a little side to this, I tell guys, you know, in most relationship, we assume the women's the emotional responsible party. The culture has assumed that they're going to be the one sort of driving the emotions in the relationships. And yeah, there's some truth to that, but a lot of it's a lot of BS, and that's what harms all of us. But ultimately, for so many men, what they have to do is they have to prove to their partner that it's safe.
Mhm.
And it's like we need to go into the cave to show our partners there's no bear in the cave. And that takes courage. And so how do you do it in a relationship? You get vulnerable first.
Yeah,
That's scary, particularly if you're
that's
not
tough.
trained to do
That's
it
really tough.
and
Yeah.
every other thing. So you open up and you become vulnerable to yourself. And it might just be allowing yourself to show it in your face and your voice. You don't even have to say something. And then the third part, the C, is you reach out or you risk connection.
Mm.
So as I'm downregulated, as I'm present and open, I invite you into some kind of connection. And if you start to practice this, it will start to become automatic because we're actually hardwired for this. We are hardwired for connection, and this is part of what Porges gets into. So it's the wiring's there. It's just the software has been sort of outdated, and we haven't really updated it, so we don't really use it. But once you start using it, it starts to become much more automatic. And I find, and others have found, you probably found, that you start just doing it in situations you never would have done it.
Love that. Rock, relax, open up, connection. Love
Yep.
it. Thank you for sharing that. I think those three things for anybody listening to this right now, if you're thinking, am I maybe doing a little self-evaluation? Like, how am I doing in each of these three areas? Am I relaxed? Am I doing the breath work? Am I opening up? Am I being like vulnerable? Am I connecting and making myself available? I appreciate you sharing. I'm going to take that this next couple of weeks because I've had a week. So I'm going to take that over the next couple of days and really keep that in mind. So I appreciate you sharing.
You're welcome. And I tell guys, screw up. It's not about getting it right every time.
Yeah.
It's just about leaning in.
Yeah. I think that's the funny thing I get a lot of times from guys. It's like, oh yeah, well, how did you know this? I'm like, because selfishly, I interview people on my podcast who teach me this, and then also I don't know it. Like I need to work through this. I stink at this type of stuff, and it takes work for me to get it right. And I just know from the work that I've done in my own home that there's guys out there that need to do work in their homes. And so I appreciate you bringing this. It's work that I think is valuable. It's impactful. It's going to help us be dads who are making a difference. So I appreciate you. I do have one more question for you though, Owen, is if you're looking at the next 6 to 12 months in your own life, what's an area of growth that you might be leaning into yourself or you're excited about?
I mean, the thing that's big is, we created a new business. So just leaning into creating this business and, developing. This is something I've done for decades, but now it's a new business and it's just 8 months old. So that's new and exciting and scary and everything else that a startup can be. On a personal level, it's just taken more time with my partner, and she's a world traveler, and I have not traveled nearly as much. So, planning a trip outside the country and enjoying her company and enjoying the world.
Amazing. Oh, and if there's a man listening to this right now who want to learn more about the work that you do, to connect with you, to hear more about your business, where can they do that?
Yeah, our site is MELD, MELD dot community. It's community spelled out. So MELD dot community. We have everything there to learn about what we do. And I'm Owen at MELD.community. They can contact me. I'm more than glad to talk to guys. And yeah, I just want to leave guys with the sense that what you do, what I do, and many others do, there's a lot of ways to make some big changes pretty quickly that didn't exist even 10 years ago. And yeah, just have the courage to do what we all had to do that first time to join that group, which is what it often is, or do that training in spite of all the thoughts you have in your head of that, oh, I shouldn't do it, and it's weird, and this and that. Just do it, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you wasted a little time and money. You're not going to be worse off for it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Owen, thank you so much for taking time today to be on the podcast. And I look forward to digging more into your work.
Thank you, Cam. It's been a pleasure.